is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And welcome back. As we mentioned just prior to the commercial break, we will be discussing the effect of COVID-19 on the tourism industry, particularly during this high season. We have with us via Zoom the president of the Belize Tourism Industry Association, the BTIA, none other than Stewart Krohn. Good morning, Mr. Krohn.
Good morning, Isani. Good morning, Marlene. Nice to see you guys.
Same here. All right, so now this is a very broad topic to begin with in respect of tourism and the impact of the pandemic on our local tourism economy. First of all, let's begin with the reopening of the Philip Goldson International Airport back in October, and perhaps what numbers or what the arrivals have been looking like in terms of visitors to Belize and their access to our various destinations and the industry on a whole.
Well, I mean, it's all relative, of course. Having the airport open was a great improvement. But it really started as only a trickle of tourists. And to tell you the truth, it's, the number of arrivals, business has improved somewhat. November was better than October, and December is somewhat better than November. But in terms of absolute numbers, when you compare the state of the industry today, this should be the very peak of our season for this period. It's just a shadow of what was a year ago. Maybe it's 10-15% of what it was a year ago. I mean, it varies from destination to destination and property to property, but you still have a lot of hotels, tour operators, restaurants that are still closed, that never did open. They closed in March and they never did open back. So it's a little dodgy to try and use statistics, but overall, there's no one in the industry who will tell you things are good, because they're not good.
Has this prompted you guys to look at marketing your various properties in different ways to attract visitors? I mean, notwithstanding the pandemic situation?
Well, I mean, everyone in the industry, and again, when I talk about the industry, it's not just hotels. It's hotels, tour operators, it's tour guides, it's restaurants, it's associated services. Everyone's affected. But, this pandemic, it's not like there was a handbook that had how to deal with a global pandemic. Everyone tried their own methods, and there is no one method that happened to be superior to all others, because you're dealing with a lot of different problems at once. Number one problem when the pandemic hit was, how do you deal with all the people who cannot come and want refunds? Well, if you're a hotel or a tour operator, especially, because these are two areas where people tend to pay in advance, and you're suddenly besieged by dozens of requests, people want their money back. They don't want their money back in Belize dollars. They want their money back in US dollars. That's a big hurdle to overcome. So that's the first problem that faced the industry. And if you manage to get that solved, and some did and some didn't, by making offers that people would postpone their trips rather than cancel trips, you still had to deal with the issues of, now you've got no one in your tour van or your tour boat, and you've got no one in your hotel. You still got your bills to pay. You've got your bank to pay. It's a whole host of problems. It's not just one problem that business people and their employees are dealing with.
So let's, when the tourism industry came to just a complete halt, and I've always made the note that, in fact, you guys started to feel the impact long before we even had the first case of COVID-19. There were all sorts of projections, and as you clearly said, there is no way of really knowing how this rebound will look and how long it will take. But from what you are currently seeing, do you feel optimistic that 2021, there will be more of a steady stream of tourists coming in, just based on what you've seen in the past 3 months?
The answer is yes. I mean, we've been pessimistic for so long that we have to allow for some optimism. I mean, remember, the greatest feature of this pandemic has been that there is so much, A, that we don't know, and B, so much that we cannot control. So the one biggest reason for optimism is the development of the vaccine. And yes, forgetting about our own domestic situation for a minute, the more people in our target markets, let us say for the moment, North America, the more people in North America that are vaccinated, the less fear they will have to travel. So more people willing to travel means more people coming to Belize and other destinations. So we have to be optimistic there. As to when that optimism will turn into actual business for us, you have to think that it will increase gradually. It would be nice if we got a pickup in our traditional winter months, January, February, March, April. Trying to predict, though, I think we're looking probably at May, June before we see large numbers of people willing to travel. And this may be good for us because there's a huge pent-up demand for travel in North America. Depending on what the school situation is there, there could be a lot of family travel, and a lot of that family travel may come to Belize. So in terms of advice for the industry, I think we'd want to gear up our marketing efforts for the summer season. But as you said, we have to market for that. So I think at the ETB level, at the ministry level, and at the private sector level, the best thing, because we don't have a lot of resources, we need to join up. We need to team up together to make the few dollars that we have go further when it comes to a marketing campaign.
I think that's an interesting point, and help me understand that further as to where you are with collaboration. From what we've seen, the marketing efforts have been on varying levels. You've seen the Belize Tourism Board have their own marketing plan geared to international tourists. You have the different associations. BTIA has their own marketing strategy, as well as the Belize Hotel Association, and then you have the individual properties as well. From what I'm hearing from you, you seem to be advocating for kind of an amalgamation of these plans and resources to effectively get out the appeal for Belize. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think a better word, and it's rather than amalgamation, I think it's certainly coordination. The ministry the ministry is certainly engaged, as is the BTB and is the private sector. The PR and marketing agency, the Zimmerman agency, that has contracted as our outside marketing agency. They seem to be, let's see, how should I put it? I think they're well in tune. I think they have good ideas. And I think the lead has to come from the ministry and BTB. And all we're saying is when those marketing plans are established, let's give the private sector a seat at the table, and let's try and get all the buy-in we can. So if a specific campaign has been established, we can then, as individual properties in the private sector, we can join that campaign and make it that much more effective. It's kind of you need to act as a force multiplier. Yeah. Well, all the bang for the buck that we can get.
I mean, you were the newly elected president of the BTIA. What is the status of the relationship with BTB? As we know, we're a month and a half after general elections, and there are changes that are taking place. Have you been able to meet with representatives of the ministry, or have you initiated that conversation as yet?
Marlene, we have been meeting with the ministry from day one. Minister Mahler is, as you know, he has a strong background in the tourism industry. He was engaged from day one. And the team that he has established there, certainly with the CEO, with the CEO Solano and BTB Chairman Evan Tillett, They are a very strong team, and they are, as I said, the word I like to use is engaged. I think, like many of us in the private sector, they put their head on the pillow at night thinking about how tourism can recover, and when they wake up in the morning, the first thing on their mind is what they can do to see the industry recover. So I have absolutely no problem. I think it's a breath of fresh air, and I think they're going full speed in the right direction. This is not to say that, in the future or over the course of the way the private sector works with the government, this is not to say that, we're always going to be 100% on the same page, but at least the fact that the ministry and the BTB is willing to work with us and solicits our opinion and at least listens when we talk. So far, so good. I'm very optimistic about that relationship.
That is a promising start. And speaking of the advocacy that the BTIA does on behalf of its members, you've made quite a few. The association has made quite a few suggestions just in this past year alone. And I want to talk a bit about those. One of them has been looking at financing, because where some properties are able to get some business, as you rightly noted earlier on, some have not opened, smaller businesses have not been able to offer their services, and so you have spoken about being able to have some line of credit opened for them to be able to access. Tell us about the update on that particular point.
Well, the main areas that we focused on were certainly DFC and Bell Trade as well. Mm-hmm. Both of those programs have been successful to a point. Dozens of businesses have accessed loans, large loans, medium-sized, small loans, and grants in the case of Bell Trade. I think where it could have gone a little better is these institutions were not necessarily geared to this kind of sudden emergency lending. Mm-hmm. And all the procedures that you go through for example, when you try and get a DFC loan, it's very complicated. There's a lot of paperwork. There are collateral issues. So the main thing we're hearing from those people who applied for loans and either didn't get them or dropped out midway through the process, they either didn't have sufficient land collateral, for example, or the banks that they were borrowing from already had their assets tied up as collateral and were reluctant to let the DFC or Bell Trade, let's say, take a second mortgage. So these are details that we would certainly like to see the path to successful borrowing be made simpler. We'd also, of course, we'd like to see a greater level of funding at lower interest rates be available. But on the other side, I think one thing that the lending programs did, they presented a competitive alternative to the commercial banks. And I think in some cases, the fact that you could apply for a 6% DFC loan made the private banks become a little more liberal in terms of the amounts they would lend and the interest rates that they would charge. So I think in balance, it was both of these programs were good, and we'd like to see them continue, but perhaps be a little bit more liberalized, because it really is survival that many businesses are talking about.
Well, from a commercial perspective, I note that the IDB Invest has also forwarded monies through the Atlantic Bank, for instance, for medium and small enterprises within the tourism industry. So maybe that too is a plus in terms of stakeholders accessing funding?
I would hope so. Again, each business faces its own problems in a different way. Businesses that are heavily leveraged, that owe a lot of money to banks or other institutions, have to behave a little bit differently than operations that are much less in debt. But certainly the only way we're going to get out of this, and you've heard me say it a million times, is that you can't have tourism without tourists.
Yeah.
And so we've got to focus on that issue. How do we get more tourists into Belize? Yeah. One thing we've certainly been working with the ministry and BTB on is further simplify and relax the entry requirements
Yeah.
for tourists to come into the country.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I know that at the last AGM that you guys had, the Minister of Tourism was present, and he presented as well on some of those very same issues that you're discussing with respect of the PGIA and all the various measures that are put in place, and trying to see how they can simplify that.
Yes, we have advocated hard for that position, and we have made suggestions to the ministry. For example, one was the lengthening the window in which visitors would be able to present their PCR test. From the start, it had been 72 hours. Now, if you keep up with the news in the States, because of the huge demand for testing in North America, the ability to be able to schedule and get the results of a PCR test within 72 hours of your arrival in Belize is very difficult, if not impossible. So we lobbied for a wider window. We asked to change that 72 hours to as much as 7 days. In the end, Cabinet, in its wisdom, decided to expand it by one additional day to 96 hours. It's helpful, but we think that window still needs to be opened wider. Also, another good thing is the use of the rapid test, and that's a great improvement as opposed to the PCR test. The rapid test is much, much easier to get. And no doubt, as the technology improves, we have to keep our requirements in line with developments and the current situation. In other words, the whole thing characteristic of COVID-19 has been the ability, or the fact that the situation changes every day. And we have to gear our policies to what's happening and what we think is going to happen, rather than what happened yesterday, last week, or last month. So it's really a matter of staying on the ball. But, governments don't move quickly. The Ministry of Health has its responsibility to guard the health of Belizeans. And sometimes that priority is somewhat at odds with what we in the industry would like to see. But what we're asking for is let's look at the numbers, let's look at the odds, and try to make sense of it all in view of the need for the economy to recover.
I'm sure as viewers listen to this and they hear of a proposal to lessen restrictions at the Philip Golson International Airport, it makes them nervous. We are still in the midst of a pandemic, and while some countries are lucky enough to be at the vaccine rollout phase, we're not there yet. How do you communicate, or what is your message in terms of being able to find that balance between ensuring safety but still allowing room for recovery, economic recovery, that is?
Well, first of all, Marlene, we have to look at the science and we have to look at the facts. I think at one time when we had virtually no cases in Belize, our big concern was, well, let's shut down the airport, which was a wise decision at the time. But that our main concern was people coming from outside to infect us.
Yes.
Is now, if you look at the situation, everyone coming into Belize from outside through the PGIA has had a negative test. Okay, so what is the danger if the vast majority of visitors are proven COVID-free? When you look at the existing population, you just a few minutes ago talked about the statistics. The incidence of COVID-19 in Belize it's a multiple of hundreds over what the odds are that a visitor is going to bring in COVID-19. So there is absolutely nothing to fear from COVID-19 being brought in by tourists into the country. And if you might say, well, if you open the window wider, the chances that someone would have contracted the virus after they had their negative test, let's say 4 days or 5 days before, yes, you are increasing the risk, but the rate of increase for that risk is infinitesimal when you compare it to COVID-19, which is raging in Belize.
Yeah, the risk in Belize, yes. Now,
So if you look at it from my point of view as a hotelier, I've got two reservations. One is a visitor, a couple from New York, and the other is a couple from Orange Walk. Which set of visitors am I more concerned about? The couple come from New York that has already tested negative 96 hours ago, or the couple from Orange Walk who has never been tested and COVID-19 is raging in Orange Walk?
Yeah, that's a practical consideration. By any
Yeah,
stretch.
I'm not afraid of my tourists from abroad. I'm more afraid of our tourists from Belize. And we love and we welcome our local tourists, but I'm just saying, if you look at the numbers and if you look at the science, that is what concern should be.
so let's talk about the situation that's unfolding internationally. As we learn more about the virus, we now know that there are mutant strains that have been detected, and specifically the one in the UK there's quite a buzz about it because of how highly infectious it is. We have seen countries now move towards imposing a ban on UK visitors or tightening restrictions specifically for tourists from UK. What is the BTIA's position on enforcing bans or tighter restrictions on people from countries where there is a concern about COVID, like in the UK where there's this particular strain?
Marlene, I can't give you the BTIA's position because we don't have a position, as this is such a recent development. But in general, I think it's been shown that these types of travel bans don't really work in the end. It's like when they're talking about when the United States is considering this ban. The fact is, the scientists have pointed out that this variant of the virus almost certainly is already in the United States, not just the UK, it's South Africa as well. That this variant is probably all over the globe already, and it doesn't make the virus more dangerous. Remember, it makes it spread easier.
Yeah.
But I don't think a travel ban on South Africa or the UK or any place, I don't think it really helps Belize. But it will affect us because if you look, that visitors from Europe, for example, they cannot come directly to Belize. They pretty much have to go through the United States. So if the US declares a ban, that's going to affect us.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. And that's why I ask if any country, because we know that we don't have to worry about anyone flying directly from Europe to Belize. They'll have to pass through another country to transit. So looking forward, though, we have seen where there have been tightened restrictions across the country. And I know that there were certain accommodations made for the hotel sector as well. Tell me a bit about what it's been like having, before the airport opened, you talked about the strain on policing tourists to follow restrictions. What has it actually been like since you've had a couple of months of practice?
I think the industry has dealt with that aspect of it pretty well. I think the curfew has changed the character of the business a little bit. It's difficult for restaurants, for example, even restaurants that are associated with hotels or those that are not, have to clear people out of your dining room, let's say by 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
It changes the character of the business. But this time of year it gets dark early, and so once it gets dark at 5:30, people just start eating earlier. I don't think we have great quarrels with the curfew. We're Belizeans too, right? And we know that we've got to safeguard the country. And the fact is, as much as I hate to say it, we're not a tremendously disciplined country, and a lot of our people are not following the social distancing, the mask wearing, and we're seeing the results of it in the high rates of spread of infection. And how we like to behave during holiday periods, and for such a small country, the effect of a single super spreader event can be devastating. And we just do not have the medical capacity to deal with a super spreader, the result of a super spreader event. It's serious business.
Yeah.
What, close to 250 Belizeans are dead?
Yeah.
That is something we've got to think about it.
Well, we want to continue on that vein and also talk about the travel advisories that have been placed on us as a result. So what we'll do is take a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation, taking a look at the tourism industry through the eyes of the BTIA, and that's coming up in a few. Please stay tuned.
Technology is ubiquitous, and it's transforming how, when, and where we work. Fulltech Systems is placing award-winning devices in the hands of information workers, allowing them to work without compromise in a world without wires, to innovate, create, and to maximize productivity anytime, anywhere, satisfying the needs of the desk-centric remote and field worker and every other worker in between. We are providing the industry's best devices to businesses going through the process of digital transformation. Partner with us today to provide the solutions that will allow your employees to work effectively and efficiently to enhance your customers' experience. Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
Have a holly jolly Christmas this December with NextGen. Contact us today to sign up for free service installation or reconnection and receive 1 month free on your acquired service. Celebrate the spirit of the season by entering our grand raffle. This month, new and existing customers can enter a chance to win a 40-inch smart TV or up to 3 months free bundled service with a Debo 3. Visit our office for a chance to win today. Our raffle will be drawn live on the national channel. From our NextGen family to yours, we wish you peace and joy throughout the Christmas season. NextGen, powered by Central TV and Internet. If we are only as strong as our families, businesses, institutions, and the communities that surround us, then by giving businesses the power to grow, entrepreneurs the ability to expand, and by giving our families the right to own something. The Belize Bank gives you the power to build a nation, our nation. We are stronger together. The Belize Bank, our country, your bank.
We're back, and of course, we are continuing our conversation. If you're just joining us, we have with us all the way from Placencia, the president of the Belize Tourism Industry Association, Stewart Krohn, and we are continuing our conversation about the impact of the pandemic on tourism and the outlook for the upcoming year. Stewart, before we went to the break, I mentioned that I wanted to hear from you whether or not the recent travel advisory from the CDC on Belize's COVID situation has had any impact, and maybe you can share what members are reporting are some of the primary questions that tourists are asking before they book.
To answer your first question, Marlene, if you look at those CDC warnings, I think the same level of warning that they've given to Belize is probably identical to maybe 150 other countries.
That's right.
So I don't think that has much effect.
Yeah.
I think the real question is, to what extent are Americans, and really that's what our market is boiling down to, Canada has such tight returning restrictions, Canada's off the map pretty much until that policy is changed. The question is, how willing are Americans to get on an airplane to travel? That really is the ultimate question. and the difference between traveling domestically in the United States and internationally. And I think that's where, when we raise this question about ease of entry into Belize, if you're a potential tourist who has gotten over the hurdle of fear of flying, so once that person says, all right, I'm either vaccinated or I've COVID already, so I'm not fearful of getting on an airplane. The question is, well, where should I go? Do I go to Mexico, which has no restrictions, Costa Rica, that has no restrictions, St. Lucia, which has less restrictive entry requirements than Belize? In other words, visitors have a choice. And I'm not saying that we necessarily get in a race to the bottom or we stop testing like Mexico does. What I'm saying is we have to be constantly aware of the competitiveness of this market and enact regulations that are common sense. Yeah. That's all we're saying. Regulations don't mean anything, don't get us anywhere. Testing policy that doesn't really get to the root of the problem doesn't get us anywhere. And what we're asking, and this is a process that has to be under constant review.
Let me ask you
what
a
about,
question.
I was going to follow up on this one. So
Go ahead.
if there still is the gold standard certification that is necessary for people to be able to visit your hotel or your institution. You quite rightly noted that all of these restrictions were devised at a time when we didn't have active COVID cases, and so we were trying to prevent the entrance through the tourists that were coming in. The context has changed, we know that. Should it not also then be a part of the consideration that the certification of hotels not necessarily be something that qualifies you to be able to take in tourists or to take tourists on tours?
You've answered your own question, Marlene, or you've asked it as a leading question. You teed that one up for me. There was a time when the gold standard concept and the safe corridor concept, which we did not originate that several countries started that long before we did. My feeling is that concept has probably outlived its usefulness, and the whole nature of the virus globally has changed. It's really the concept of nationalism and that every country has its own policy is not so effective anymore, because this virus is throughout the whole world. Even places that were only a few months ago considered pretty much free of the virus, having major outbreaks of it. The main thing is that all of us all over the world, Belizeans and tourists, there is almost no need for a distinction between our local citizens and the visitors that come to our country. So this effort to isolate them and separate them, which even from the beginning never made a whole lot of sense, certainly makes much less sense now. The thrust needs to be on having all of us in Belize, whether you just got off the airplane or whether you just got out of bed here in Belize, we've got to follow the science. Wear the mask, keep a distance, monitor your own self in terms of how you're feeling that day. These are things that the scientists have been telling us for, 9 or 10 months now? Mm-hmm. That's the only way that this virus is going to be conquered. And there's a long way to go before the vaccine takes effect, and we still don't really know what the result of that is going to be. So nothing is inevitable here. We have to be aware at all times. So whether, I feel very bad because I think independent restaurants or operators have been at small hotels that have not been able to reach the gold standard for many different reasons. Sometimes it's finance, sometimes it's just institutional capabilities. Okay, for whatever reason, they have been unfortunately handicapped, and I think we need to take steps to get our independent restaurants and smaller hotels and tour operators. It doesn't mean they get a free pass, but a lot of the gold standard requirements do not really have anything to do with minimizing the spread of the virus. They have to do with things like record keeping and stuff like that the average small operator really can't comply with.
Well, I'm glad that you're raising that as a talking point here, because when you look at what the previous administration put into place in terms of getting all of these hotels and businesses up to scratch regarding the gold standard, and those who were not eligible or did not qualify, and those who spent a lot of money qualifying themselves, and the fact that we're still only a trickle in terms of those who are coming in as visitors, that's a significant economic impact on any small business or any medium business for that matter, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the cost of one electronic thermometer, it's around $150. Of hotels, you need at least 2, probably 3 of those. So that right there. But the point I'm trying to make, Isani, is that people all over the world are aware of the virus and knows what they have to do. People do have their own free will. So if you're a visitor or if you're a Belizean, you want to go out to dinner. Now, if you go to a place and there's no signage that says wash your hands or social distance, there's no basin or nearby bathroom that you can wash up, there's no hand sanitizer around. I mean, come on. Knowing what you know, are you really going to go eat at that restaurant that obviously does not care about your health? You walk into the place and the servers are not wearing masks and the bartender is not wearing a mask. Do you really want to go have a drink at that place? I mean, at some point, the onus for protection of your health has to be on you.
Yeah.
So whether the place has a gold standard sign on it or not is not the only indicator of how safe you are at that particular restaurant or small hotel or whatever. So I think we need to start exercising a little bit more common sense when it comes to those standards.
Well, I mean, you've definitely put it out there, and we have heard it from the first implementation that the concern was that it was really the smaller business that were going to be the ones to suffer under these circumstances. Let's shift gear to something else, and let's talk about local tourism. You know, the push this year to get Belizeans to travel and kind of help provide some business to the tourism sector. We haven't been discussing that as much, but I know in your opening statement to members, you noted that this is, in fact, that there still has to be a focus on local tourism. Let's expand on that.
Well, absolutely, Marlene. The local tourism business has been a lifesaver for many businesses, both large and small. Traditionally, the overall tourism industry has not really paid attention to the local tourist, and certainly the pandemic has brought this into sharper focus. We as an industry need to be friendlier to our local tourists. We need to drop rates. We need to make the experience more of a positive one. We need to train our staffs in many instances that are, you know, at some places they tend to kind of turn up their nose a little bit at local visitors because Belizeans are not known in the business as big tippers, let's say, but then Canadians and Germans are known in the business as being not great tippers. So there's you know, we have to change some of our thinking, but it has been an absolute lifesaver. The stream of local tourists has not been huge, but it has been steady, and I think it served a lot of different purposes. I think a lot of Belizeans who in the old days used to vacation in Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Miami, Mahawal, even Chetumal, now look back on those experiences and say, you know what, I've got better value and better service at my Belize hotels and resorts and restaurants. And the added effect is you're helping your own country's economy. So I would hope that when this is all over, that local market is going to stay. And I think I think the tourism industry can help that along by looking to do things that to make it easier for local tourists to vacation in a way that doesn't cost them an arm and a leg.
Yeah, where it's still affordable.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the trickle-down effect that we have seen from the tourism fallout, and that's been the unemployment. Properties have had to let people go, hotels are not open, their staff isn't working. Since we've started to see some business, do you know if there has been, if people have been called back to work? What's the situation? I know even at BTIA, you guys had to face letting go some people as well.
We had to let go our whole administrative staff. That was 3 people because our revenues dried up, just like the revenues of our members dried up. And we have our plan and we're putting it into effect. But like everyone, we our belt. It's survival is where it's at these days. But we'll get by, and I've been gratified that a lot of our membership that had previously lapsed because of financial difficulties caused by the pandemic are now coming back in good numbers, bringing back their memberships into good stead. And that's going to help us recover as a body that advocates for the industry. It's necessary that we have the ability, the administrative ability to survive and prosper and work on behalf of the industry. But I will say this, we advocate on behalf of our members, but we also advocate on behalf of the larger industry. And it's just the hotels. We are an umbrella organization,
Yes.
and we continue to act on behalf of all parts of the industry. And this includes the cruise industry as well. We haven't heard much from the cruise industry because everyone kind of acknowledges that with the US government banning the sailing of cruise ships until I think it's February or March now is the earliest.
Yeah.
We're, regardless of what some of our personal feelings are about cruise tourism, we recognize that a certain number of people
Rely on it.
employed in the industry, and we don't like to see them unemployed.
So let's talk recommendations as we close, or critical areas that need to be looked at. This is supposed to be the peak of the season, and what are some of the things that you think need to be addressed as soon as possible, or at least brought up for discussion as we head into this peak season?
Well, I mean, Marlene, we've already covered a number of them. So
Yes.
certainly at the top of my list would certainly be to the easing of visitor entry requirements.
Yeah.
That's again going back to you can't have tourism without tourists. We need warm bodies in our hotel beds, in our restaurant seats, and in our vans of tour operators. So that's got to be a key thing. Secondly, I would not underestimate the importance of a campaign to make it easier for local tourists to enjoy their own country. And this takes the form of perhaps some easing of hotel tax burdens, marketing campaign, a limited local campaign to get people to realize the wonderful things, the wonderful attributes of local tourism. Those 2 things are important there. Certainly the easing of financial requirements to be able to access some of the government assistance programs. We'd certainly use our moral suasion to ask the commercial banks to let them know that this industry is going to come back very strong one day in the future, and the deeds you do now are not forgotten in the future. So I would ask the banks to kind of take a close look at where the industry is going to be in the future. Another thing is that we haven't mentioned is testing requirements. In other words, COVID is everywhere in the country, and COVID is within the tourism industry as well. But usually it's in the form of our employees coming down with the virus, just like any other business. And our employees are not getting COVID-19 from tourists. They're not getting them from our guests. They're getting them, just like all of us run the risk of COVID, from our own friends and neighbors. We need an improved testing ability, perhaps something we can take a little more responsibility for, as the ability to rapid test our own employees, so that the virus, once it gets into a business, does not spread around. There are businesses that I know where whole departments with COVID-19. You can't run a successful business when all your employees have COVID. So that's important. Even a thing like the municipalities, a trade license. Tourism businesses are just like any business, and they're subject to trade license in the municipalities. Well, you've got businesses that for the last 9 months have not earned 5 cents in revenue, yet at the same time, the municipality is banging on the door for their trade license. So that they really got nothing out of the trade license in 2020 because they weren't even open for the majority of 2020. Now they're banging on the door for trade license for 2021. So if any of our mayors or trade license committees are looking at this broadcast, please have a little bit of understanding for the tourism businesses that have suffered in the pandemic, whether it's rescheduling payments, even a one-time elimination of payments or discounts. It's important. Again, these are your friends and neighbors who have been very hard hit, harder hit than any other businesses in the country. So that's another thing. And I think above all, in terms of broad policy making, again, we're asking that we try to think ahead. So right now, the pandemic is raging in our prime US market, okay? But we know that 6 months from now, the majority of residents in those countries are going to be vaccinated and ready to travel. So we try to anticipate what their needs are going to be. Okay, so 6 months from now, do we really need to have a testing protocol at the airport? Do we still need to have a travel app? Or if we decide we still do need a travel app, we need the kind of travel app that we should have had years ago that captures all the tourism data in real time, rather than have to wait till a filled out form is transposed and collated, and 3 months later we get the travel statistics. I think there's that kind of thinking needs to prevail. And I'm also confident that the people who are the decision makers in the industry and in the government, I think they're well aware of that, and we have to encourage them to be innovative in that kind of thinking and to look ahead 6 months from now.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Of course, this is one of the most critical conversations we've been having all year long, and we needed to be able to kind of get a close as we close off the year. Thank you, Stewart.
Always a pleasure, Marlene and Isani. Thank you.
Thank you, too.
All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.
This COVID update was brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price, but stay for the service.